Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's event, How Concur Technologies Leverages Visual Testing for Localization Tests. My name is Adi and I'm the event's moderator. I just want to make sure that the sound is working, so if you can hear me okay, please use the raise your hand option in the control panel on your right. So show of hands if you can hear me okay. Okay, I see that you're raising your hands. Okay, I'll take it as sound is working. Okay, awesome. Today's event features Peter Kim. Peter is an experienced senior software design engineer and a member of the automation strategy best practices team at Concur Technologies. And just before I hand over the microphone to Peter, some administrative stuff. Feel free to ask questions during the webinar. You can do that in the GoToWebinar control panel on your right. We will answer as many questions as possible at the Q&A session at the end. But even if we don't, after the webinar, we will email you an answer, so it's worthwhile asking. For optimal viewing experience, we recommend you close off any unnecessary apps running in the background. This webinar is recorded and will be made available for on-demand viewing, and the link to it will be emailed to you once the recording is online. Also, if you encounter any technical issues during the webinar, please send me a private message in the chat room, also in the control panel, and I will try to take care of it as soon as possible. So let's kick off. Peter, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Adi. I hope everyone can hear me. Okay, I just want to make sure everyone can see my screen. So I want to share something new that myself and my QA automation team stumbled upon actually less than 6 months ago, and it was at a QA testing conference. And I presented at that conference, but when I attended one of the sessions, I had some doubts. And the session was visual testing by Applitools. I attended that conference with a lot of doubts in my mind because I had used visual testing automation strategies in the past, which just simply was not worth it to actually include it in our QA processes. So here's a quick overview of the agenda. You don't need to memorize this, but I hope to share, and I know we have a really vast audience with different backgrounds, such as maybe this is the first time you've heard of visual testing, or perhaps you're already using visual testing and you want to know more advanced methodologies, or perhaps you have an automation framework and you're trying to leverage it to extend it with visual testing. I hope to cover all those points to get to answer your questions that you might have be thinking of. I also hope to do a really nice demo. Actually, I have 3 demos that I have in store for you. And I have some design concepts that I think it's really important that you would need to know to make sure your automation framework is prepared for visual testing as well in the way that we use it here at Concur. So quick background. Most of my career, I've been a software developer. It wasn't until several years ago that I jumped into the world of quality engineering. I do have a great passion for writing code. For the last 5 years, I've been working on software, specifically automation frameworks that generate executable code. And I have a deep passion for data modeling designs. Currently, I'm working with a really advanced team at Concur, working on Node.js, and we have a really nice, cool web application leveraging React. And there's a few other things I really like. I'm also extending some of my QA background into advanced mobile testing as well. Now, one of the things a lot of people ask me is, Peter, you were once a software developer, why QA? QA, to me, it's a really serious topic. It's where you realize that as a QA engineer, you honestly have the ability to prevent serious problems, whether it's a application you're working on which could threaten one's life, or an application that just perhaps someone loses all their money because of an incorrect decimal point. But the point is, I hope the project that you're working on, your QA manager, your QA director, your VP, realizes the extreme importance of your team. Okay, what is visual testing? Basically, it's a simple way to describe visual testing. It's basically testing an application just like you would do it, but through the user interface, which means testing with your eyes. So obviously we know that's a manual process, and it'd be great, especially if you're a quality engineer, if you could automate it. Now, imagine that you went from here, from visually testing with your eyes, to here. Now you can automate all those visual tests reliably. If you could do that, imagine how much more successful you would be with your test automation. Now, before we talk about visual testing, I really want to go really quick over automation frameworks and strategies, because they coincide hand in hand. Okay? The first thing is your test scripts are going to be executing, and obviously your test scripts are going to be firing off the tests which will leverage your visual test framework. And in this case, it would be Applitools eyes. So your framework has to be able to extend using new technologies without risking refactoring your complete test framework. Also, your framework should be able to reuse existing automated tests within tests, meaning that you don't want to go into the bad practice of having an automated test that consistently hard codes the login process. You should have one login command which contains a set of you can refer to. Another thing about your automation framework and strategy, it should scale. You don't want a framework that's always executing against one specific browser, one specific version, or OS. You want to be able to scale that out. Because if you're always testing on one specific browser, well, all the defects might be in a different browser, or even a different version of a browser. Also, your test reports are extremely important, because those reports are going to tell you where the gaps and holes are. You want to know which requirement or test case failed. And without concise reports, simple reports, how are you going to do that? And I can only summarize with these 3 words. And if you've ever been in a startup, and I've been in more than 7 startups, the success for a startup for any product, it must meet these 3 pieces, these criteria. It's got to be a simple, fast, and powerful solution. And your automation and the processes surrounding your automation, it should be all 3 of those. Okay? So again, just to recap, framework is written to support the browser independent of your web application. That's really important. You don't want to tie your test scripts and your application requirements into your framework. Now it's not a framework. You just basically have this thing called a framework that's tightly coupled to your test scripts. Okay. Another thing that I would recommend for a really sound framework and strategy is your functional test framework. It should leverage visual testing, and when it does, it should have very little impact. So your functional tests can be supported and wholly work hand in hand with a visual test framework. The next one I want to discuss, but I won't go in detail, is if you are using Selenium and you are using the page objects that most everyone uses, you might want to rethink your page object design. It's been around for 7 years. You might consider something called an application model-based design for better scalability. Now, of course, you should be able to reuse your existing automated tests within tests, and hopefully you have a very sound and well-defined command design where you can encapsulate and define a nice domain-specific language. And of course, without going into detail, you should be dry. You don't want to be wet. And if you can write your automated test where they're requirements driven, then that's huge, because then your reports and the existence of those test scripts explicitly matrix back to the requirements, and it's easier for you and others, especially your manager, to know why do you have those 300 test scripts. You can quickly show them that these 300 test scripts map to these 25 or 100 test cases and requirements. We want that scalability, otherwise you don't want to just cover one application, one browser. Okay? And going back to simple test case management, you might want to rethink if your framework is wholly based on an XUnit, JUnit, NUnit based framework. You see that a lot, it's very common, but there's a pitfall to that. Those frameworks were specifically designed more than 10 years ago, actually 15 years ago, for software developers. So if you're using a NUnit based, such as JUnit, to do your test automation for functional testing, you're really already limiting yourself on the type of reports that you could be creating. Just recapping, you want a simple, fast, and powerful test framework. And if you look at the bottom line, I remember once we had a junior software developer. I'll use his name. His name is Joshua. And he made a joke. I do a lot of meetups in the DC and Washington, the Baltimore area. And this young kid right out of college, he said, hey, I just wrote 10,000 lines of code in 2 minutes. And of course, that's nearly impossible. So this young kid, sorry to call it, I hope that word is a politically correct kid, this college student, he introduced me into the world of code generators. And ever since, I've been hooked on it. And it's a strategy that I recommend that you leverage for automation frameworks. So if you can define how you want to test something, if you can describe the requirements surrounding a page and a specific element, then your framework should be able to convert those descriptions into executable code. Something for you to think about. Okay. All right, so this is a quick recap. Now, these are some of the challenges without visual testing. So as QA engineers, testers, we know we're given requirements or user stories. And here's an example. Only admins can access a specific page, right? And that's your requirement. And let's say we have a test case which states that upon successful login with row admin, you're able to access that user accounts page. Now, if you go to automate that, and in this example, we use Selenium, some of the common assertions would be, of course, in your Selenium script, it's to navigate to that page with the admin account. And some of the assertions, you would use locators, right? So there's some examples of XPath, CSS. So the assertions would be, are those elements visible? Now, one of the things that's kind of controversial in the Selenium automation world is sometimes they want you, or people will say that pick a selector that's really, really unique. But there's a problem with that as well, right? When you really, really try to pick a selector in Selenium that's quite unique, and it's only because you want your test case to scale where it doesn't break. So you're kind of indirectly trying to find so unique that's always able to find it over a course of time, so that if the user interface changes, your automation script is still going to execute. So given that, when you're overly resistant to combat that type of brittleness, There's a downside to that. And here's an example. So here's our user interface. This is the application as it stands. So we logged in as admin, and that's the page that we want to access. So if we rewind it back to those three assertions, it passes. So we have the button that says update. We have a change password element, and the title is manage user. So this is going to pass. So now let's say your UI developer, he had a really bad night, and this is what he did. He made some code changes. He regressed. Now, if you look carefully, the title's the same, but if you look carefully, the change password is now located in the wrong area. And there's two other errors on this page. However, because your assertions were written in that manner to be so unique, well, you didn't catch that bug. Yes, that element does exist, but unfortunately, those elements exist in the wrong location. So now you have a defect which was not caught. So what I'm stressing here is when you have a test strategy using Selenium or any other technology where you're using locators based on the HTML or the DOM, well, that's the issue that you face. You really don't know what's actually rendered. You might know what's returned on the browser in terms of the HTTP GET POST request, but you really don't know what's really being displayed to your end user. And that's huge. So one of the biggest things that automation engineers, and I think QA managers and QA directors need to know about this as well. If you never heard of pesticide paradox, you need to know immediately what it is, because it's something that automation engineers face all the time. So we did a simple example of how we could get something into the trouble pesticide paradox, which is automating your tests using assertions in a manner where they're always going to pass. I remember at one of the previous companies I worked at, they had a really interesting comment when I went there. I asked them about their test automation, and one of their automation leads made a statement. We have over 1,500 automated tests, and they all pass. That's a huge warning sign. So if you're a QA engineer or QA lead, QA manager, that's a huge sign of pesticide paradox, because as humans, especially in the IT engineering field, we write code so that it passes, but we don't write code to ensure that it fails in an expected manner. And that's no different for automation engineers. So what happens is you get all these tests that pass all the time because your QA manager, that's what he wants. He or she is going to grade you on how many tests you've created, the automation coverage, and how many passed and failed. So the more that passes, the better you look. And maybe that's a bad thing, because you get into this trap. So without having to go into this line by line, some of these really should pop out at you, such as, are the assertions written to favor passing? How many assertions are there from the previous release? If a feature was modified or a brand new feature was added, well, shouldn't you see the number of assertions increase or decrease? Because if you're not exposing the number of assertions for your test case, your automation test case, but instead you're showing a report that said this test script called login with credentials that are valid, and you just show and you only map whether or not that test automated test passes or fails, well, guess what? You're going to be susceptible to pesticide paradox. I want to show you something. First, I want to say hello to everybody. I wish I could speak all those different languages, but I can't. So that's why we have localization experts. So I want to cover localization real quickly, but not too deeply. Okay, so those are all the languages, and they say hello. And so what is localization test? Localization test is basically from the UI. I don't want to focus on the other 10 different test types for localization. This is specifically localization testing from the UI. So when you're testing localization, you have to be able to recognize and identify different types of text and fonts, because now your web application, your website, needs to be able to support a bigger audience, hence different text and fonts. Your localization test should also be able to cover regional and cultural salutations, dates, themes, and identity. So the salutations is really interesting because here in the United States, if I'm walking down the street and I bump into someone and they know me, they're going to say, "Oh, Mr. Peter Kim." Now, if I was back in Asia and I was to bump into the same person, hopefully he says, "Oh, Mr. Kim Peter." So you can see even salutations are different in regards to where your web application is going to be running. And now we're entering the age of globalization, internationalization, so more and more companies must move to a sound localization strategy. Otherwise, they're not going to reach different regions and different cultures. Okay? Other examples are dates, even within a region or within a nation. So you might have a website where the theme changes based on one's favorite football team or a company brand. So if you're American Express and you're logging in, perhaps your web application wants to show specific things to American Express. All right. And of course, images. You might show different images based on your localization. Even audio, video resources. If you have video resources, you might have to film those differently. And audio, of course, you'll have to have good audio translation. If your website uses PDF files, you might need to support different versions of that PDF file based on languages. So that's a recap, real quick share on localization tests. Okay. And of course, why do you need automated visual tests? Well, we just talked about all the headaches and pain with localization tests, and also we talked about how functional tests, pretty much you're limited. You're limited in that you're picking and choosing very finite set of assertions to give you a level of confidence that your passing test really meets the needs of your requirements or your test case. And we know that it's not really sufficient, because if it was sufficient, you wouldn't be working over the weekend on a patch or a hot fix, would you? All right, so specific to Selenium and WebDriver, again, you're only inspecting the HTML and DOM, not the actual rendered user interface. Okay. The other one, again, you're testing across many, many different versions of browsers, operating systems, and even more importantly, screen resolutions and devices. More people are using their mobile device than their desktop these days. All right, so given the last 3-4 slides, now let's say your QA team, now you have to worry about functional testing. Now you have to worry about localization testing as well. And that's just one or two language. I'm talking about dozens and dozens of languages. Now your QA team is not multilingual. You guys can't speak all these different languages. What can you do? And a little bit more than 4 months ago, that's what my QA team was challenged with. How can we improve our localization tests through the UI? All right, again, these are the challenges. Basically, you now have to be able to look at the rendered image or the rendered page on the browser, things such as the layout, the fonts, colors, and so on. Here's another reason you might want automated visual tests. So let's look at what you have now. You get requirements, it goes to you, the QA tester, and just in case for you didn't know what that molecule was, that's caffeine. And in this very, very manual process of doing your visual test, no matter how hard you try, ultimately a UI bug is going to manifest itself. So you want to go from here, or a little bit more than 4 months ago, this is where we were at with localization testing. Ah, so much better, right? Now I can enjoy my Starbucks more often. So here, why not have a bunch of robots do it for you? And those robots represent a really sound application model-based framework tied in with Applitools eyes. And guess what? You can exponentially reduce those functional and UI defects. Okay? A lot of people ask me, with visual testing, how can you use it? Well, you can use it throughout the whole SDLC. Yes, we have our UI developers using it as well. I'm going to skip this, the details. Now we'll come to my favorite part. It's a demo. So let's go through this quick demo, and I'm going to have to jump out of this presentation. So if it looks kind of askewed, you have to forgive me. Okay. So hopefully you can see my terminal. So what I'm intending to do is automate this. So let's pretend this is our web application. And our UI developer has changed the UI because all suddenly we had some changes for the Japanese or the the Hebrew or the Korean language set. So we have a new release based on changes to the localization, and now we need to do regression tests. Well, if this is what our page looks like now, and later on it's going to change to something like this. Okay, I don't know if you saw the difference, but even though I wrote this demo, I don't even remember the differences. But imagine instead of one page, it's 250 pages per localization. That's a lot of coffee. I love coffee, but I don't think I could drink that much coffee to do that. I would probably be bouncing through the roof. Okay, so how will we do this? Well, I'll show you the way how we do it here on my core automation team. Okay, so I'm going to share with you kind of our DSL of commands. This is not important. Okay, so I'm just going to show you how we execute our test. Okay, I'm going to execute our test here, and I'm going to use the Applitools eyes extension in our framework. So you should see a browser pop up automating that scenario that I just showed. Oh, and you get to see the log. So I'm not typing this. I wish I could type that fast, but it's actually running the test now. And it's hard to tell, but actually Applitools eyes is actually scanning the page, and it's even scrolling the page when needed. So in other words, if there's more content at the bottom of the browser, it will actually auto-scroll down to that area. Now, if you look at the test results here, these are our own internal assertions. So let's say that the QA engineer made 2 assertions, which is basically, do we hit the right page? Okay, so that's a functional assertion. But how good is that? Well, let's find out. So our functional test passed because we hit the page that we expected. But let's see what Applitools gave us. So I'm going to go into my demo account. And this is the new test report, or the visual test generated this visual test capture. And you can see it's 2:30 p.m. I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. And so let's see what happened. Okay, so the very first thing you should see is, since this is the first time I ran my test, this is my candidate to be a baseline. And that's an important word, candidate for a baseline. So my Selenium test ran, and it took a bunch of pictures. Okay, hope you can see that. I hope I'm not going too fast. So the next step would be I would sit down either with someone who has domain knowledge with my application, or maybe the PO, the product owner, or get the localization experts and say, is this what was expected? And so at that point, we could say, oh, yes, we like that. And so we're accepting our baseline images, our snapshots, since this is the first time we ran it. So I'm going to save that. And now we have a brand new baseline. And so the way it works is once we created this baseline, now the next time we execute that same script, we have something to compare it against. Okay? So now imagine it's a week later, and they're like, hey, guess what? We found some issues. We need to update the base. We had to make more changes. Could you rerun your execution, rerun your test? And again, if you don't have visual testing, it's back to the coffee. This time Starbucks is probably giving you free coffee by now. So let's rerun our test and see what happens. So I'm just going to run the same exact test. So here, we're going to run that same test against the new rollout of the application. But just to make things interesting, what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch around the screens to make sure that we cause real differences in the visual test. So I'm going to go to my, I learned Vim just so that it would be easier for you guys, just to let you know. So I'm going to switch the ordering around. So that way we'll force failures in terms of image comparisons. Okay, so I'm going to swipe these around. And now I'm going to rerun that same exact test. So I'm running my functional test, which is model-based, application model-based, which has been extended to either leverage or ignore our Applitools eyes. Gosh, I wish they would get an acronym. Our Applitools eyes module. So you can't really see it. Maybe the resolution's not that good, but it's actually taking pictures as it goes along right now. Okay. And the reason it seems slow to you, it is slow, it's because the timeout. So for those of you who are familiar with Selenium, when you're looking for objects, typically the default is 30 seconds. So it's looking for these specific objects that it can't find. So remember we changed the pages around? So it's looking for a title called Localization Test Page 1. But since I changed the title around, it's not going to work. So right now it's looking for Localization Test Page 2. And so it's going to wait to 30 seconds to find that, and it didn't find it. Right? And so as a functional test, it failed, which is true because I didn't find the pages with the appropriate page title that I expected. So in this functional test, you can see that this QA tester, who happens to be quite lazy, they were only interested in validating the title. Well, let's see what visual testing gives us. This indicates that I have a new test that's ready to be reviewed. And here it is, right here, 4 minutes later after our baseline. So let's look at what we just did. Sadly, our test failed. But actually, in this case, it's not sad because we found a potential real bug. So let's take a look at it. Let me blow this up. The first thing you should notice, down here, you see the 4 notches. And they're all in red, not green. And so it means there are visual differences. So let's see what they are. So on the first page that we visited, let's see what happened. The highlighted area indicates those areas that are different. right? So, looks like our changes to the localization had some impacts. Let me show it in a toggle mode so it's even more, it stands out even more. I really like the dashboard and the user interface that Applitools gives you, because there's so many different ways you can analyze your data. And so you can zoom in as much as you want. So you can actually go down to the pixel level. So let me just get this deep, and I'm going to toggle it. So this is our baseline, and the way I know this is enabled, right? So this means I'm looking at my baseline here. I'm sorry, it was this one right here. So since it's on the left, that represents the baseline. So this is what we stated earlier in our test run as this is how this page should look when it's rendered. Now I'm going to toggle it. So if you look to the right, that means that we're looking at the candidate, the new candidate page. And if I go back and forth real fast, just like a movie, you can actually see those areas that were impacted. Pretty neat, right? That's what I said 4.5 months ago. So now, if you go back to that functional test we executed, let's say that that QA tester was a little bit more proactive, and he had 20 assertions, and 20 assertions on these different types of text. And let's say we had another guy who was even more proactive. He had 50 assertions. Honestly, would that be enough to really say that we actually validated this page before we go to production across 25, 30 different localizations? Probably not. And that's where the power of visual testing comes in. Again, a little bit more than 3 years ago, we evaluated several products, and they can do some sort of visual testing, but it usually meant huge amounts of disk space, sacrificing speed of the automated test, and also having a lot of false positives. Using Applitool eyes from my comparison with my failures with other tools, it's just amazing. And I would strongly recommend, whether you need visual testing or not, just to take a quick look into it. Okay, so let's go into the next failure. And this is where we reverse this page with the previous page. And let's look at this one. This one's a little bit more interesting, right? Because here, if we want to, if you look carefully, the reason these failures or differences occurred are due to the color. So let's zoom in so you can see it. So you can see it's the same exact text. It's only the colors that are being detected. What a nuisance, right? Well, fortunately, with the advanced algorithms that Applitools eyes, I hope they find a nice acronym. Hopefully they can just call it AIs or something. Anyways, you can actually pick and choose the type of visual comparison to make. So here, let's pick content, and magically, boom, a lot easier, right? So the next step in this process, again, you're going to be sitting with your localization expert or someone with domain expertise, and you're going to be determining whether or not these changes to the right are expected or not expected. And then you would have to go through a process of saying, do I accept the candidate changes, the changes to my right? And you can say, yes, I do accept it. Then it goes to the next one. Do I accept it or reject it? Right? To say whether or not those changes that you saw, whether or not you accept them or not. And that way, by accepting or rejecting those differences, you save it. And that's how you create your new baseline. That way, the next time you run your automated test script, the comparison is going to be made with that baseline. So this is a really simple example that we just went through. Hopefully it's simple enough where it can kind of encourage you to give it a shot too. Now that's so simple, I think I would rather give a more concrete, more real-life example. And we're running out of time, so I'm not even going to go to the slide. I'm going to go to a real example that we use here at Concur. Okay? And so without even talking, I'll just run this test. And let's do it for the Japanese language. And I do want to use eyes. Okay? And you can see for yourself what this test most likely does. Oh, I turned the logger on. Okay. Just to let you know, at Concur, we do travel and expense, and I am proud to say we're the #1 company that does travel and expense. We support many, many localizations, too many to mention. And when you think about localizations, it's not always about text. Sometimes it's about images, glyphs, cultural things, like the salutations, for example. To write automation that captures all those different types of nuances due to cultural and regional changes, it's extremely difficult to do that if you're using something like Selenium or even a paid-for functional test tool. There's really no way to do it unless you do have a visual testing strategy. And I want to share that within 4 months of integrating Applitools eyes in our application model-based framework, we basically covered more than 2,000 pages across more than a dozen languages. And we can do it anytime our users, our user UI developers make a change. To me, that's quite exciting and quite amazing, because what that translates to, it's not just the UI in terms of what's rendered, but it also helps us with functional testing, which means bugs, catching bugs. So in this example, all the assertions that our QA engineer, they all passed. Those are our functional results right there. But it doesn't mean that the test really passed, because again, there's more to it when it meets the eyes. That should be their motto. More to it than meets the eyes. So let's see what we got here. Okay. So I already had a baseline, by the way, and that's why everything passed, which means my development team is awesome. But let's take a quick look at the results. Okay. So that's our landing page in our test environment. And I can show side by side. On the left is our baseline. To our right is the candidate that we just executed. If you look, this is quite interesting. I want to show you this one specifically because here we're only interested in this element, this specific component, which contains these elements. We really don't care about this side because dynamically these images, they get rotated and they change just to make you happier if you're using our solution. So if we want to, we can use Applitool eyes to say we only care about taking a snapshot of this specific element. That way, why not be preventive and basically lower the risk of false positives. Okay. And so here's some error messages that we're trying to drive out by triggering error conditions. And so here we can validate the Japanese error messages when someone tries to log in without credentials. I love Japanese food, but I can't read Japanese. But the nice thing about it, the nice cool thing is that I can test Japanese web applications now. How cool is that? It's cool. Again, I can pick and choose when to take a picture and when not to. Just like, it's just, so the inspiration, if you saw the introduction of the webinar, it's called Lewis and Clark, a la Lewis and Clark. They were explorers that basically mapped out the Pacific North during the 1800s. So imagine they were doing the same thing. They're going on the same long hitchhike trail, which is 8,000 miles or 13,000 kilometers for those of you in Europe. And they had a camera and they took pictures. Well, that's kind of the analogy that we chose when we created our framework that we named Scout UI. So just like a scout, the whole objective is to strategically go to pages that we care about and take those snapshots. And to get to those strategic pages, it's going to be a combination of and I'll get to that. So I'm glad I was able to show you a live demo. We're running out of time, but I want to make sure I showed you all the demos. And now I'm going to go back to the slide. Okay, now back to the slide. Okay, so we did the demo number 1. Okay, and just to let you know, if you were to use Applitools Eyes, there's a tremendous amount of resources on applitools.com. So for me to relist it, it just wouldn't make sense. Rather, you can go to applitools.com and go to the resources. But specifically to start up, one of the things you need is a Applitools API key. And once you have that, that's how you basically connect with the over a secured cloud, which I really love because we don't have to worry about our own test resources or disk space. So connecting over the cloud, that's how we integrate our Scout UI test framework with Applitools Eyes. I just want to quickly mention, just like a Scout, right, like Lewis and Clark, not the superhero Lewis and Clark, not his girlfriend, but the explorers. So the thing that we do in our test framework is we're able to modify the URL explicitly. Of course, you want to be able to navigate by clicking on links. You want to be able to expose content which is triggered on the client side. So, for example, scrolling your mouse over an object which displays more content. You need to be able to support that. Scrolling to a specific point. Filling out a form, or just partially or fully filling out a form, because you want to be able to fill out portions of a form to pull out additional content, such as a pop-up or an error message that says, hey, you can't submit this form with this invalid date format, for example. Then, of course, you want to be able to take a picture or a snapshot after submitting the form. So if you can do these 3 or these 6 things in your framework, you're an explorer. Okay, so I share that with you. That's kind of our high-level DSL. Okay, and our framework, it's basically a interpreter. It's a binary. It's a binary interpreter. All our scripts are written using that type of commands, and it's parsed and read by our Scout UI driver with parameters on the test configuration and data. And that's how we do it. And we also leverage Sauce Labs. I talked about the importance of being able to scale across different operating systems, browsers, and versions of browsers. That's a lot of work. That's a huge tax on the QA team. So you might want to visit saucelabs.com and see how they can help you scale out your test. Okay? So again, in the demonstration, I shared how to create a baseline. Then in the second one, we talked about once we have that baseline, how we can do a quick UI regression test, right? And I showed you how Concur we're able to do localization tests. Okay, and the whole point of this is test like a Scout. Scouts are incredible with their ability to navigate. Just the other day, I was at Whole Foods, and this Boy Scout tracked me down and tried to sell me some jalapeno popcorn. It was really good. I ended up buying that. Got home, 1 week later, someone's knocking on my door. It's another Boy Scout. Now I got caramel covered popcorn. So they really do know how to navigate, and that's the inspiration. So this is important. These are 3 design concepts that you should know to make sure that your framework is as good as it could be. If you're not familiar with design patterns, you should know what they are, because if you're developing a framework, you're essentially developing software, and it should be treated the same way as developing software. And yes, we write unit tests against our framework. You should as well. But these are some frameworks. Design patterns that you should be aware of. And if you don't know them, I recommend you know them and inject those into your existing framework. If you don't, I would hesitate to say your framework is not scaling. Another one is, I mentioned it earlier, if you're using the traditional page objects that's always the #1 hit when you do a search on Google. Just to let you know, that's an outdated design. It's been around for the last 7 or 8 years. And sadly, even in the world of development, there's always new designs and technologies that developers are picking up. It's not true with the QA side. Maybe there's new tools that you can buy, but the design, well, that doesn't really change. Okay? And I just demonstrated why your assertions aren't as great as you think they are, and that's why you need visual tests. One last thing I want to kind of share with you. I just shared some design concepts. You know, I want to kind of share a little bit more. And this is about good time management and good processes, right? As QA engineers, specifically in automation, and especially if you're using Selenium, creating assertions is a huge task because you're looking for the locator. You're always refactoring your locators whenever the UI changes. And that ends up being a huge tax. You're spending more time trying to figure out what your assertions are rather than quickly pinpointing the assertions that you really do need. So don't spend too much time thinking about what assertions you need. Get it done quickly. And the answer to that in the world of QA, it would be visual testing. Another one is you do need your test automation, test scripts to be reliable, repeatable, and scalable. But at the same time, it better be simple, because if it's not simple, how are you going to manage covering 2,000 pages, you know, 500 test cases, 50 requirements? How are you going to do that? The other one is recognizing some of the outdated designs and strategies you're using. Just because someone else says it works for them doesn't mean that it's right, right? If someone's able to automate using JUnit and you think that's the proper way, maybe it does work. And if it's working for you, that's great. But at the same time, look elsewhere, right? I always kind of believe, learn what's out there. Learn those principles. Because once you learn those principles, then you'll know how to break those principles and improve upon them. And that's it. I can't believe I got through this. This is probably the first time I was able to hit every single slide. If you're still awake, you know, I appreciate that you joined this webinar. And if you take QA engineering as serious as I do, I hope the things that I shared really speak out to you. I listed all the references that would help you get started. I listed information on how you can contact me. I usually don't accept anonymous LinkedIn requests, but if you send a LinkedIn request and say that you caught my webinar, I'll be more than happy to accept your request. And if you happen to be at the Software Testing Professional Conference next spring in San Francisco, I'll be speaking there, and the title of my session is If Eddie Van Halen Was a QA Testing Engineer, basically re-engineering what you've been taught, innovative software designs for your framework. I'll be speaking about that. I hope you can make it, and you know, hope you can come up and let me know that you met me over the webinar. That'd be fantastic. And for those of you who are interested and you want to work with me, or you know, some of the things that I shared, it's interest with you. We're always looking for incredible, innovative talent. And there's a website you can go, and you can go to the careers link. And I want to give a special call out to thanks to Moshe Millman. He's been really great in providing us the information we needed in terms of picking up visual testing. My colleagues here at Concur, I didn't list it out here, but I'm involved with a Washington, D.C. Meetup group. So Gloria, Joshua, Jennifer, Bonam, and Jinja, and you know, all those, you guys have been an inspiration in our meetups to continue to think of innovative ways. And that young kid, I'm sure he's a millionaire in some startup somewhere, where he's using metadata programming somehow to generate code. Now he's probably writing hundreds of thousands of lines of code. in 2 minutes versus 10,000 lines of code. I want to thank him wherever he may be. So again, I really appreciate this time, and hopefully you guys got something out of it, and I'm open to questions if there's any questions out there.
Yes, so Peter, we have a few minutes for questions. Can you see them on your dashboard, or should I read them out to you?
Yeah, oh, I do see it. Let's see. Oh, there's too many here. Someone asked about the framework. Someone thanked me about all the different languages. So the framework that I shared with you, it's an application model-based framework, and it quickly leverages basically a declarative mechanism where the QA engineer can pretty much say, let me give you a quick example on application model-based strategy. If you have a friend named Tom, and you tell your friend that if Tom knocks on the door, open it for him, then immediately when someone's knocking on the door and it's not Tom, you know you're not going to open the door. So if you were to convert that in code, just from that one statement in your metadata that's your framework's going to use, you can see how that gets translated into code. So literally, your code translator could say, if knocker equals Tom, open door, else, shut the blinds. You can generate that if statement. So that's a real simple example, but the ability to put conditions and triggers on elements relative to other elements, such as this OK button is only clickable when the user enters a valid string that matches this specific regular expression in the username input field. Imagine if you were able to state that somehow, then you should be able to generate the code which asserts that. And so that's what I meant by an application model-based framework. Again, meet me in San Francisco or contact me through LinkedIn, and I'd be more than happy to share application modeling with you. I think I have time for one more question.
One more question, Peter. So just pick it wisely.
Okay. Okay, so this one is my experience with the screenshots, and is it brittle? Is it fragile to our systems? Well, we don't, and we don't work locally. I know that in my first demo, it was locally. It was just so that I can show a really concise demonstration. But again, what I shared earlier holds true. With Applitools Eyes, it's a secured test cloud that you're using to do your image snapshots. And then we're over a secured connection with Sauce Labs, where all our application servers are also running remotely. We have no issues. So yes, using Applitools Eyes, using remote application servers, as well as local ones, and even integrating them with a third-party vendor that gives us the scalability that we need, such as Sauce Labs, we haven't really hit any issues in terms of brittleness or any types of fragility.
Hey Peter, I will add a bit to your answer. This is Adam from Applitools, if that's okay.
Fantastic.
Okay, so basically Applitools Eyes, we provide our service in 3 different deployment models. The first one is the public cloud, which is what Concur is using. We also have a private cloud offering, which is a cloud offering where the customer is the only tenant, and we can have further security enforcement there, like a closed VPN network or limiting the IP addresses that can access that cloud. And the third one is in deploying the Applitools Eyes, the server behind your firewall, deploying it on premise so that nothing leaves no image or no details of the test leave your firewall, leave your organization. So it is completely possible to run the Applitools Eyes behind your firewall without going out to the internet.
And actually, to add on to that, that's what we're precisely doing. Everything I just did today was behind our corporate firewall.
Okay, guys. First of all, we have a lot of questions, and I know that we don't have time to address all of them, but I promise that we will send emails with answers to anyone who asked a question. Peter, I want to thank you for this very in-depth and very interesting webinar, and thank you for your time and for sharing what you and your team at Concur do with visual testing. So thank you very much. And thank you
Our pleasure.
for joining us.
Thanks, Peter. It was an awesome webinar and awesome demos. I loved it.
Thank you. Me too. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.